evening, Mr. Trump. You've been summoned to this boardroom because your teammates, the American people, have grave reservations about your abilities, your temperament, and your character to lead this country. Oh yes, we've all heard your endless boasting, your arrogant speeches, lies, and tirades during the course of this election campaign, and it's time to make the decision about whether you are fit to hold the office of the presidency. This is the summary of my decision in this matter. First of all, you claim to support our military and that you'll make us strong again, that you are the only one capable of being the leader who's strong enough to face ISIS. I question whether a coward, a man who evaded his duty to serve in our military as a youth, could ever be man enough to be the leader of it. I question whether a man who calls POWs and people who suffer from post-traumatic syndrome and disrespects their services and sacrifices in the honor of this country really honors and supports our veterans and military the way you say you do. I question whether a man who encourages cyber attacks against our nation by foreign enemies is not already guilty of treason and therefore should never be allowed to be commander-in-chief of this country. I question whether a man who encourages the use of nuclear weapons by Japan and South Korea to destroy China and North Korea, and would even see us as the first strike aggressors in settling international differences, should ever have access to our nation's nuclear arsenal and launch codes. I question a man who has for lack of a better word, a bromance with Russia's Vladimir Putin and business ties with the Russian mafia and numerous foreign lands, could ever make foreign policy decisions that would be free of conflicts of interest. I question whether the leadership's abilities of a man who thinks he's tough enough to take on ISIS but can't face Saturday Night Live sketches without whimpering and crying about them being tough on him. Believe me, Mr. Trump, ISIS is going to be a much tougher foe than the cast of Saturday Night Live. Secondhand, you claim that you're going to make America great again by bringing back jobs from overseas and penalizing companies that move their businesses out of America. I question whether a man who has his own business interests overseas, taking advantage of cheap labor in multiple foreign countries, I question whether you even have the right to make this hypocritical claim or promise, especially when several of your companies are producing your product lines in Mexico, a country that he would divide us from with your Great Wall. Leaders govern by example, Mr. Trump. You don't seem to be capable of practicing what you preach or what you promise. You claim to be the best businessman and that there's no one better than you are at negotiating and drawing up contracts, and that you have the abilities to balance our budget and to cut our foreign trade deficits. Looking at your track record, I must question whether a man who has been bankrupted 4 times, a man who has failed business dealings in hotels, airlines, golf resorts, pageants, and universities, and who has been sued by businesses too numerous to list in his corporate and private business dealings, should be let anywhere near our country's financial resources. Financial experts have seen your proposals and are unanimous in their findings that your plans would wreak havoc with America's finances and benefit only wealthy corporations and the upper class. I question whether a man who claims he'll make Americans richer by creating better paying jobs for them can achieve this by taxing the hard-working middle class more and reducing taxes for corporations and those in the top 1 or 2%. I have to question why. Why a man who doesn't pay his bills or taxes isn't already in jail and is even worthy of citizenship in this fine country. Finding tax loopholes to avoid paying millions of dollars in taxes over a period of decades, and using the results of your poor business management and leadership skills as an excuse for doing it is simply criminal. The thousands of lawsuits brought against you and your businesses, including one by a bunch of little girls who worked on your campaign, whose talents you had on your little stage, but never paid for it. This demonstrates a gross fiscal irresponsibility and a wanton disregard for the effects of your greed and loathing for other people, at best. And the behavior is unfitting for a candidate running for the highest office in this land. You claim that you're worth billions and that you pay your fair share of taxes. We have no evidence of that, Mr. Trump. Without being able to see your tax returns, we can only surmise that you are hiding truths that you didn't wish to be seen. From your income, your net worth, to taxes you paid or didn't pay, to questionable tax write-offs, to legal settlements and payoffs, to foreign business interests, to your charitable efforts or the lack of them, etc. You know, I'm sure after this election that the IRS will be pretty thorough in going through your paperwork, Mr. Trump, and that you, and not your lawyers, will be held accountable for your creative accounting and fiscal dealings. You claim that you are a generous and charitable man, and that you're going to help and lift up the people to make this country great again. Believe me. I question how there is no evidence to support your claims to having given millions of dollars to charity or charitable organizations. Please explain how independent investigations into your claims to this effect show that you've given almost nothing to charities, the ones that you've spoken of. Do you have tax records to support these assertions? Or are you lying and trying to pull the wool over our eyes, Mr. Trump? I question both the generosity and the ethics of a man who steals money donated to his charitable foundation for other purposes and then illegally spends it on numerous items, including a 6-foot portrait of himself. Where there's smoke, there's fire, Mr. Trump. I have no doubt, but this is but the tip of the iceberg. I question whether a man who mocks people with disabilities and one who stereotypes people in lower income poverty brackets, calling them robbers, crooks, thieves, is in any way a generous man. Certainly not religious, certainly doesn't bow to God's laws. And the only time you address these people are when it suits you for a campaign photo opportunity. Photo opportunities that now include white people, Caucasian people holding up Blacks for Trump signs. You say that you will unite us all together to make this country great again. I question whether anyone who is a racist could ever reunite this country and get us all working together toward any common goal. We all, myself included, share concerns about new immigrants from the Middle East or anywhere else for that matter. And that is a problem that we'll have to be very diligent and vigilant about. But your hatred of other peoples and cultures goes far beyond that. From all the lawsuits you lost involving racial discrimination in your housing projects, to your outrageous slandering of Mexicans, Mexican Americans, and Hispanics, calling them rapists and murderers, to your connections with the Ku Klux Klan, for God's sake, to your stereotyping and blaming Muslims, even to your attacks on the President of the United States. Your track record, Mr. Trump, of racist behavior is quite clear. For you, only a white America would be seen as great again. But we're not going back to those old ways, Mr. Trump. We're not. Your inability to realize that the world is getting smaller by the day, and we have to embrace that. We must, rather than to isolate ourselves from it with walls which will only divide our country from within. Such thoughts have no place in a global future. You claim that coal and other fossil fuels are the future of this country, and that warnings about global warming are Chinese propaganda and conspiracy. You claim, and I question this, I question whether a man who says he surrounds himself with the best people is A, either incapable of finding those best people, or B, is willing to listen to those experts and actually absorb the facts that they present to him. The fact that you mock the Pope as some church guy who knows nothing about global warming, without even knowing that the Pope's background was as a scientist, leads me to believe that you're just plain unwilling to listen, or that following a course of action to correct this would get in the way of your corporate greed. I question a man who cannot see that investing in fossil fuels will turn us into the same dinosaurs that produced them, and that retraining workers into renewable energy fields will produce a much brighter future for this country while helping to avoid global disaster. You claim, I heard you, you claim that you have the temperament, leadership qualities, and the character to be the next President of the United States. You've put yourself on par with Lincoln and the other greats. I question whether a man who never answers a question when it's asked of him, but deflects the subject to other issues, is fit to govern. Such a person is either covering up his or her lack of knowledge on a subject, or is resorting to evasive tactics to avoid the truth. There's no other way. I question whether I want a proven liar as my president. You, Mr. Trump, have been well documented by, not the news media, but by independent researchers to be the biggest liar of all the presidential candidates in this 2016 campaign. And it's not even close. Saying, I never said that, or wrong, when there's a definitive video evidence to the contrary, means you're either senile and in denial, or just changing your face to suit the mood of the day. I question whether a man with your overinflated ego and sense of self-importance could ever be a good leader. You listen to no one, not even your own campaign managers. You are rude beyond doubt, always shouting or talking over other people, and you would stifle or eliminate anyone whose opinions are different from yours. You would even strike down the freedom of speech. Your attacks, and those of your followers, on American citizens at rallies, the press, social media, and Saturday Night Live are things that only dictators do. And that, my friend, is not America. I question whether a bully who resorts to name-calling, finger-pointing, and intimidation, whether he's inciting violence at his rallies, threatening everyone with countless lawsuits and legal actions, stalking his opponent during a debate, and encouraging his Second Amendment followers to shoot the other party's candidate, should be allowed to even remain as a ballot choice. I also question whether a man, and I don't use that word lightly, who has absolutely no respect for women should be allowed to be president. You would jail women who've had abortions. You mock their weight. You mock their appearances. You mock the way they look, their hairstyles, dress. You brag about your sexual exploits with them in the most vulgar and disrespectful way. You've used your positions of power and influence to sexually assault them. Not only in Miss Universe, but you'll soon be standing trial for the felony rape of a 13-year-old child. This is not, cannot be, something that will be in the character of our president. Mr. Trump, please don't interrupt. A good leader leads by example of his or her actions and brings people together to make his or her country the best it can be. He or she takes responsibility for their actions, accepts the burden of leadership as the most important thing he or she has ever taken on, for the good of all, not just as the prize from some reality show. He or she must be as good a listener as they are a speaker, and they must choose their words wisely so the country will follow them. They don't always play the role of victim or martyr, claiming, the legal system is prejudiced against me, the press and media are against me, the judges are biased, the election is rigged. They don't divide people with fear as you attempt to do. You, sir, were born with a silver spoon in your mouth. And like a spoiled child, you have never really matured past that level. Up until now, you've always been able to buy your way out of trouble. Hundreds of lawsuits you've had to settle, buying good people to take care of things. But the American people will see through your act, and we are not for sale. You're egotistical, narcissistic, violent, racist, sexist, and these behaviors, quite simply, are not acceptable qualities for this office. You're heading on a path not to the White House, but to the big house. Mr. Donald Trump, you're a loser. You have none of the abilities, nor the temperament, or the character that's required to lead Team America as President of the United States. You're fired.